I had to remember to turn my own video on. Okay. And I'm
She's
going
so
to
cool.
change the good evening, Daryl. Let me change the fortune cookie and then we're going to get moving. Oops. Okay, wait, bot, you got to go. All right. Good evening, good evening, good evening, everyone. My name is Laurel Rutledge. I'm the host of Alignment Vision Action here on Fireside, and I am so excited to have my guest tonight, Corry Gumbs, who is the owner of Black Label Media, and he is the founder of the Black Podcasters Association. And that's where I met him. And the Black Podcasters Association is powered by Afros and Audio. So excited to have him here. Welcome to the show. I see Daryl, I see Woody, I see Jason, I see Sonia. We are going to have a great show tonight. For those of you who are new to Fireside, just really quick kind of housekeeping things. On the very bottom of your screen, on the left-hand side, you'll see the little hamburger thing, and you can click on that and you can ask to invite to speak. And so we'd love to have your questions. Corry and I are probably going to talk about 15, 20 minutes or so, and then would open it up for questions. And then also, and you can also ask to invite to video. We can have up to 4 people on video. So we'd love to see your faces if that is, you are so inclined to do so. And then the react button in the bottom right, you would click on the react button, pick an emoji, and you can just send that emoji if you like. And those have sound with them, which is really cool. So we can hear you clapping or laughing. And if you want to send a chat, if you click on you have to click an emoji first, and then you put something in the chat and you send it, and the chat will pop up, and we'll see like a little cloud that will know that you have a chat. So my producer is not here. She actually had some surgery last week. So if I'm a little late to your chat, I apologize because I'm multitasking. And yeah, that doesn't always go well. So we're just going to take it as it comes. So this evening, Corry Gumbs, we are going to chit chat about vision and action and Black Podcasters Association and uplifting voices and this whole podcast thing and having shows and developing shows. And I am so excited to have you here. Good evening, Anthony. So Corry, welcome to Alignment Vision Action.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, this is going to be so cool. So let's start here. So you and I met because I got this thing that came across something that said Black Podcasters Association. I was like, cool, let me just join that and see what's going on because I love this podcasting thing. And then you and I got a chance to meet too because I had some questions. So let's start with, you own Black Label Media, and then you are also a podcaster, and you started this Black Podcasters Association that is now a huge community on Mighty Networks powered by Afros and Audio. So maybe take us back to when you started. Like, why did you start the media company, and what was it about podcasting that really made you say, let's do this big community thing?
So it's a multifaceted story. It's got a lot of moving parts. So I'll try to summarize it up. So back in I'm a web dev by trade. I do web development. That's been my thing for the past couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
And a couple of years ago, I was in school. I was driving Uber, and one of my friends, he's a Google engineer, and we were talking about doing our own podcast.
Yeah.
And we just kept talking about it. And while I was in school, I had went back to school to brush up on my skill sets and stuff. And driving Uber out here in New York City to pay my bills. Right before Christmas on 2018, had a car accident, got rear-ended by 3 cars, and I couldn't drive anymore. And it was just a bad. It's been a bad 3 years in regards to that.
Yeah.
But so we were in talks to having an investor to help us get the show started. We were talking about going city to city and meeting people, and we had a whole idea planned out. And the investor fell through, and it was just just kept being about talk, like let's do it. And but between his schedule and my schedule at the time, it was just too many conflicts going on. And so when I had the accident, I was out of commission. I couldn't drive anymore. I was all jacked up. So I was like, well, okay, I need to make some money. I need to figure out how to bring some income coming in. And I forgot exactly how it happened, but I was just doing some research on how to start a podcast, like everybody else does when they're trying to get into the space. I was on YouTube, spent a lot of time on YouTube, a lot of Google searches, and I found Shannon Hernandez, who's a radio personality out in out in Arizona, and he
Uh-huh.
does videos on that, and I liked what he was saying. So you started watching his videos, and one of his
Right.
videos I was watching. I also have a background in music, so I went to school for
Yeah.
it when I was younger and all that stuff. So I just happened to notice he was like he wasn't in the same location where he always does his video. He's on location somewhere, and I was looking at his setup in the background, and I'm like, I stopped paying
Right.
attention to what he was saying, and I'm looking at the equipment. So I actually just reached out to him. I was like, listen, I see you got like a mobile setup, and he met with me. We talked. He told
Mhm.
me he gave me some like what his setup was because
Mhm.
again my I always wanted to be an engineer, so I had a
Right.
background in that. And basically, long story short, when he did that, I was like, okay, I got to figure out how to make some money. I was talking to one of my best friends. I was like, I have an idea of maybe doing like a mobile podcast studio type of thing.
Yeah.
She was like, that sounds great. And like, she started, she helped me really, she's the one who helped me come up with the name because she was like, it's
Mhm.
more like a concierge, like a black, she was in
Yes.
fashion. She was like more like a black label thing. And I was like, okay, I'll call it that. But, long story short, I took, one day when I was feeling well, I took my last 2 grand, went to Guitar Center, sat down with the
Mhm.
guys there for like 2 hours, talking, telling them what I was trying to do. We was going
Mhm.
through all the equipment, brought my first setup of equipment, and that's when my service Black Label Podcast Studio was born. And this
Yay.
was the year before the pandemic. Um,
Ugh.
so I, do like everybody else does. I let my friends know, and
Right.
of course nobody bit. But one day a friend reached out to me. He was like, he's like, you can come here and record, right? And I was like, yeah. He lives in Staten Island, but he was like, you come here and record. I was like, yeah, because him and his girlfriend used to have a podcast, and they would go to New
Uh-huh.
Jersey, and somehow the studio got double booked, and they couldn't they couldn't find babysitting and all that stuff. So I came to
Right.
them, and they became my first clients, and that's when I started like really learning about like how to record in a open
Yeah.
environment, not in a studio. And it was just that was it. And that's how I officially got into podcasting. I knew about
Mhm.
podcasting all the way back in the early 2000s because I was
Right.
trying to do a music business website, and one of the things we're going to do was set up a podcast platform inside of the website we were building for
Mhm.
artists to connect with their to connect
Oh, cool.
with their audiences. And this was
Mhm.
back in like everybody's credits 2006, and I tell people it was way before that podcasting actually
Yeah.
existed. It was just in a different form. But
Mhm.
long story short, that's how I got started officially in this space. And was playing, that whole year I was working with them. I was making my mistakes, learning what I needed to learn. And I was like,
Yeah.
okay, the good thing was they lived in Staten Island. They lived by, under the route of JFK. So the planes are flying over, and, it's in the hood. So, all kind of hood
Right?
noises is going on. So I'm
Yeah.
like, okay. So now I'm making a list of like how to upgrade my equipment and techniques. So, and it was just that first year was like really a big learning experience for me. Um, and then, I did like most people do. You get into all these Facebook groups and all these things,
Right.
and you're trying to learn, and you see, and I guess my engineer side kicks in. Like I like to reverse
Mhm.
engineer things, and one of the things that started learning about was pod fading, and I always ask the question, well, why do people pod fade? And something that I
Mhm.
really to this day I still think about cerebrally, like go
Yeah.
deep dives in it and try to understand psychology behind it. And some people might say I go too far, but I'm trying to understand it because I want to solve that
Right.
problem. Because even
Mhm.
now, it's still a problem.
Yes.
And it seems like a lot of people in the industry want to sell products to solve the problem, and I want to cut it off right in the beginning stages. But I
Right.
was joining Facebook groups, and I just started, some of the information I was seeing in those groups, I was just a lot of conflicts, and what I was seeing
Mhm.
was a huge problem for me was the translation of and not I'm not trying to throw race in it, but
Yeah.
statistically it was white male dominated industry
Yes.
for a very long time,
Mhm.
and because of the pandemic coming up, black people starting getting more and more into it.
Yes.
Um, and it was always a small percentage in our community, but I
Mhm.
was just seeing a disconnect in regards to, especially for black people asking questions,
Yes.
and that cultural, that cultural disconnect.
Yes.
Because we tend to see things a certain way where other groups might see it
Mhm.
differently. The resource disconnect, the information disconnect, and I was like, and I would jump in. I like to bring the
Yeah.
smoke on Facebook and stuff, but I was like, okay,
Yes.
we need to have our own group. And some of the black groups I was in, I wasn't really seeing much in regards to teaching people about podcasting, about
Right.
having real in-depth conversations about podcasting, so people understand it on a higher level. And I decided, I was talking to a friend. She's like, you should start a Facebook group. And I didn't know anything about it. I just joined them. I didn't even
Right.
think about running them. And that's where we started as the Black Podcasting Group because I couldn't come up
Mm-hmm.
with a name. So it was just a
Right.
placeholder. And as more people started, and then the pandemic happened.
Yep.
So I started that actually, we started when the pandemic hit here in New York
Yeah.
City in March of 2019, I don't know, 2020, 2019.
2020. Yeah. Uh huh.
2020 we started. So that was like the day I was supposed to, that was the month I was going to officially launch my business after the year
Yeah.
of working with people. I was like, okay, I have my marketing
Mm-hmm.
plan set up. Then my friend, we were working on the group for like 2 months before we actually set it up on Facebook.
Right.
And then all of a sudden the pandemic happened, and we had to adjust.
Jacked
I
up
had to
everything.
adjust because it hit my area
Yeah.
really hard, and I didn't know what to
Yes.
do because we didn't know what was going on, and blew up my business model completely because my business
Mm-hmm.
model was to come to people's offices, homes,
Exactly.
and
Yes.
locations, and of course we wasn't doing that. So um, then the group just took off because I guess like as time went on and the pandemic started locking down, people were looking for things to do, and we just blew up.
Yes.
Like we went from like 100 members in March to like about 500 by June, and it
Mm-hmm.
was just rolling. It was just taking off, and I didn't know what I wanted it to. I really didn't know what I wanted it to be. I didn't understand what I was doing, and it was just like a really long, slow growth between now
Yeah.
there and where we're at now. But it was really it became a spam fest too. But
Yeah.
it was interaction in groups and asking questions as well. But
Mm-hmm.
that's basically how I got started. A car
Well,
accident.
right. But sometimes it takes that kind of stuff to really jump us into what we're supposed to be doing. and
Yeah.
and and when you and I talked there, because there's so much that and we were, just so everybody who will listen to the replay and everything, Corey and I, even in the green room just to check tech, I was like, okay, now wait a minute, I got a mic and some earpods and a camera. I don't I see all these people with all of these boards. Yeah, no.
Oh, you
um
should see over on this side. You can't see
See,
it, but
yeah, see, I can't. And Corey has done this amazing job. So especially here on Fireside, when we talk about not only the audio piece, which is so amazing about the platform, but the video piece. And Corey did a behind the scenes kind of, I don't even remember what you called it, but he actually showed us with the two cameras he's got, and you could see him recording as he's recording. And
yeah.
see, I can't with all that. It's like that sounds really cool, and I probably should do that because it's really interesting for people. But see, that's more stuff that my brain can handle right now. And so, when you started kind of the Black Podcasters Association, like the Facebook group, and you talk about addressing especially marginalized voices in this area, um, part of it is I'm not sure. There's more now, clearly, but I don't know that the black and brown community were doing as much listening either to podcasts. Like, was that really a thing? If you think about it, back to 2000, was that even really a thing we were doing? Is listening to not just creating, but were we actually listening to TED Talks? Were we even in those spaces?
So one of the things, I like statistics, I like data.
Yeah.
And one of the things I really I stumbled on to when I first got started was the Edison Research Report, and every year
Yes.
they would do their podcast report. I mean, it's changed since then, but they would do
Yeah.
their podcast report, and it was good information. And I would always tell people in the group, you should read this just to give you an idea of the industry,
Mm-hmm.
right? What's going on. But the area that really caught my attention was when they were showing you the numbers of podcast listeners. Where like at the time
Right.
when I remember it was like 60 something percent, 70% predominantly white male,
Mm-hmm.
certain, the demographics and the psychographics. And then we were at like hovering at like 11 to 13% depending
Mm-hmm.
on the year. It was we Latino listeners and black listeners were typically running neck and neck every year, one
Right.
fluctuating over the other. So, and I
Mm-hmm.
didn't see, to me, in that, over 2 3 years I was looking at, I was like, there was no real big growth spurts, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that
Mm-hmm.
I would say we weren't putting a dent. Now I could tell you from a personal, I've always liked podcasts. I used to listen to them
Mm-hmm.
a lot, especially when I was commuting back and forth from my house to New York City to
Oh yeah.
Manhattan. It's a 1.5 2 hour ride sometimes, so you
Oh
need a lot
yeah.
of time to consume. But when I would talk to my friends about podcasts, or I was sending to them, they weren't like really into it. It was far
Yeah.
and few in between in my circle, and I have a very diverse circle where people were listening to
Yeah.
them. I personally think, from what I saw through Facebook in the group, was that it exploded once the pandemic happened. Like
Yes.
the first 6 months of the pandemic is when we just started to take off, which was made me
Mm-hmm.
happy that Edison Research decided to do like they did the Latino listeners report
Right.
and the Black listeners report, because it gave us more very detailed, more specific
Mm-hmm.
information on that. But truth be told, and this was something that when we were going to do our podcast, this was something we were why we wanted to do it in the first place was uh, Black people are typically late to market in adopting new technologies.
Mm-hmm.
In my personal opinion, from
Hmm.
as a programmer, I've
Yeah.
always looked at it like because we're late to it, we typically don't
Mm-hmm.
maximize our. It doesn't resonate, and we use things for entertainment, technology for
Right.
entertainment, stuff like that. We don't look at it like like what happened with the past Bitcoin boom. All of a sudden, my
Yeah.
friends, everybody's a Bitcoin, a cryptocurrency
Mm-hmm.
investor, and I'm like, I've been into cryptocurrency since 2013,
Mm-hmm.
2014, and the blockchain. And it's like we're always late to market, and by the time you're late to market, even in the podcasting space, which is what I
Yes.
was seeing in the group in the communities as well. It was we're late to the market. We don't understand what it is. We're not influential enough in this space
Mm-hmm.
to carve our own way yet. But
Mm-hmm.
it's weird. It's a weird thing because we don't have the data like to really do a deep dive.
Right.
But you have your personal circle, you have some data out there, and just your own personal observation. But my personal
Yeah.
observation is a lot of times we're late to the party when it comes to certain things.
Yeah.
And
That's that. Wow. Wow, that's really deep. And because, um, because just like Edison did research, I was at the Black Pod Fest in Atlanta, and
Mhm.
some folks from Sirius were there, and their podcast space in particular, and they've also done some studies and some data. And what's interesting about what you say that I think we've got to really start thinking through, and just some other conversations I've had, like with a young lady that I interviewed not too long ago, who's like, look, we are on everybody else's platform, but what are we doing to develop our own media platforms, right? To own the distribution channel of the content. And what I was thinking about when you said all of this stuff is we do tend to be really late to adopt things. And I'm sure there's some psychosocial issue to that, right? Some systemic challenges around that. Some of that is access, some of that is, whatever. Um, And if you look at a lot of the podcasts, at least the initial ones, if you haven't had exposure to some things, what are the ones that are really being pumped up, right? So if you, like me, I love Malcolm Gladwell. So when I see something from Malcolm Gladwell, I'm like, absolutely, I'm going to listen to Malcolm Gladwell, or
Right.
something from Harvard Business Review, or there's like an intellectual piece that crosses over um, race, ethnicity, gender. There's that kind of stuff that kind of attracts people. But then there's the deeper, like you said, that it's beyond entertainment. It is, no, I've got a message to share. And so as you started building not only your Facebook group, but then moving into this Black Podcasters Association, what is it? And even thinking about, Fireside, because there's not enough of us on Fireside, in my opinion. What is it that you see through the things that you're doing in the Black Podcasters Association, through your Facebook group initially, that is getting at that, hey, no, we've got stories to tell. The technology is not over our head, right? We need to be in this space, and this is how we do that. What is it that you're doing to take all this knowledge that you have and what you see as a problem and kind of bringing that to the group?
Woo. I gotta think about this because I tend to be a contrarian in a lot of ways. So I bring so
Me
one of the
too.
things, one of the things I noticed, and one of the things I wanted to really do, and when we started to in the Facebook group, it was basically everybody could do whatever you could post whatever you want. So it was a lot of
Mm-hmm.
advertising, a lot of spamming, right?
Mm-hmm.
And after a while, I was just like looking at some of the stuff, the product that people were putting out, and one of the biggest things I wanted to do was like I was getting a little frustrated because I was like, we're being a lot of Black people being lazy and putting out their product, and I know a lot of people
Yeah.
don't like to hear that, but
Mm-hmm.
I was like, we have to create a standard because if we don't
Yes.
create a standard, if we don't create a process of saying, hey, we need to bring our love, people want to monetize their podcasts. And you were talking while you talking. I was thinking about. I was like,
Yes.
you know, a lot of the people who talk about monetizing podcasts, especially in the white community, had
Mm-hmm.
years to go through the trials and tribulations and the
Right.
ups and the downs and make the mistakes where they now kind of have a formula that they now sell to people, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I was looking at that and I'm like, well, they had time to figure things out where
Mm-hmm.
you get the idea you want to start a podcast and you want to monetize it immediately. And I'm like, but you're not your audio, back to the audio stuff.
Right.
I can't listen to your audio.
Yeah.
It's bleeding in my ear. So I was like, we have to raise the bar a little bit. We can't just say,
Mm-hmm.
and that was where I started talking about the resources. And it really made me start thinking about why are people putting out these subpar product? Why are people not putting the effort in? Why are people in our community not making that thing? And it's the instant gratification of like, I have an idea, let
Yeah.
me get it out. The creative instant gratification, or it's the idea of
Yeah.
I have something to say. People are going to want to listen. It's a lot. It was very complicated, and it was something I was seeing in the group. But to answer your question, I wanted to create a standard. I was like, we have to raise the bar. We have to
Mm-hmm.
create a process to do that. And then even like we're talking about building our own platforms,
Yeah.
people saying, well, I hear people all the time, and I'm like, well, okay. And I've had people come to me like, I know you do programming, and I'm like, well, what kind of budget you have? Because you're gonna have to
Right.
hire three, you want a $10 million website or $10 million platform, and you can't even pay one person to do it. And it's not that
Right.
somebody doesn't want to try to figure out a way to help you do it, but just a lot of people are unreasonable.
Right.
In this podcasting space, they're very selfish. They're unreasonable at times. So when you try to offer criticism, you try to help them
Mm-hmm.
bring it to a next level, they don't want to hear you. I don't know
Right.
if I answered your question, but it's very complicated. And
Yeah.
like I said, the group, the start that first year, the group really helped me learn a lot about myself as
Mm-hmm.
well as just the space and trying to figure out how to solve some of these problems. How do
Yeah.
we solve the problem of equipment, right? Getting decent
Yes.
equipment. Not necessarily you don't have to have what I have, right? You don't have to spend the
Right.
kind of money I spent on mine, but enough where you put out a decent quality product that somebody can listen to. Um,
Yes.
how do you understand the content? Because I was seeing a lot of copycatting of content.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You see, you see, like what was it? Nori, Drink Champs. When Drink Champs dropped their podcast and we had the
Mm-hmm.
video, all of a sudden, all I was getting calls. You do video, you do video, do video, and I'm literally fighting with potential clients. Like, listen, that's a bigger production. You're
Yes.
trying to compare yourself to people who already have 30, 20 years. They already have an audience. When they put out an
Yes.
album, they sell 200,000 copies no matter what.
Right.
So
Right.
they don't the path that they have to travel is significantly different than yours.
Yes.
Let's work our way up to that point. Let's figure out ways to bring money in because that just requires more work. And people would
Mm-hmm.
push back, and it was like it was frustrating. It was just like, how do we solve this problem? And I think as I was trying to evolve the group, I was trying to figure out, okay, how do we solve this? How do we answer these things? And how do we get our community to get on the right path in
Yeah.
regards to this? And the biggest thing that we kept coming back to was setting a standard,
Yes.
setting a standard. And once I started taking that on, I started seeing that forming in the group as well.
Right.
So,
Well, and I think, like you said, setting a standard, but also it kind of goes back to what I work with all my clients on. And it's so easy, right? Physician, heal thyself. It's so easy to see this in other people. But it is, like you said, being really aligned with this is why I'm doing a podcast.
right.
This is the vision I have, right? This is what I want to do and what I want to get out of it. And then this is what I can and am willing to do to make that happen, including investment of all my resources, time, energy, and money, right?
Mhm.
And so it's being willing to have those not only candid conversations with experts in the area, but candid conversations with yourself about what are you really willing to do.
Yeah.
Because I know even for me, when I first started my podcast, um, my podcast was actually started literally to just be a feed into my consulting and coaching business. I didn't
Right.
start the podcast to do a podcast, right? Now, I built it the way I intended it to be built because the target is very much very busy corporate women, right? It's like even if you're commuting, you got 15 minutes of time. And so I wanted
Right.
my podcast to be short and sweet, short bites, little bites. Here's the thing, something to feed you in the morning and keep it moving. And so I keep my pre recorded podcast still 15 to 20 minutes unless I'm interviewing somebody. but it's turned into something bigger, right? With the radio show and with now Fireside, to be able to reach more people with the same message, but more in depth. And that comes with, having learned to do video, because I was doing video because of my other coaching business, right? And getting on video, having people know who you are, having been in corporate so long, building a network. And so to your point, when people say we want to be in the podcast space, and we want to have a podcast, or we want to have a show on Fireside, or we want to have, a radio show like I have. Well, that sounds real good, but what are you actually willing to do that and then stick with it? Because let's see, the radio show turned 2 this year, the podcast turned 3 or 4, and I keep reading, yeah, people do 3 or 4 episodes and then they're out.
Yeah.
Like, I
And
thought about that.
that's why that's the question. That's what I'm looking to talk, the problem I'm looking to solve. And I'm looking to solve it as a whole, but as well as in our community, because there are now we closed when we decided to move to Mighty Networks, we closed down the Facebook group.
Hmm.
But some of those people who I follow, some of those people who followed me, a lot of them are still in it. We're going on 6 months since we moved. Since we Yeah,
Yes.
6 months since we officially launched
Hmm.
the Mighty Networks platform community, and some of those people are still in the same spot that they were
Mm.
last year.
Yeah.
And it bothers me because it's like, well, what's going on here? There's supposed to be, there's supposed to be upward growth. There's supposed to be something you're
Right.
supposed to be learning as you're going along. And the pod fade, that's where the pod fade comes in, because at some point you're
Yeah.
like, I'm putting all this time and effort. I'll possibly be spending a lot more money, spending, because I tell people all the time, podcasting, one of the first things I tell somebody comes to me, it's an expensive hobby, from
Yes.
either time and outlaying of the money, whether you got to pay your hosting fees, if you decide to
Yes.
hire an editor, if you decide to invest in equipment, it's an expensive
Right.
hobby. And at some point people want to get a rate of return on that
Right.
investment, but they're not. I used to say they're not willing to do it. I'm starting to believe a lot of people just don't know, or they're not willing. There's a not willingness part, because they're not willing either to accept the information from people who have been doing it,
Right.
or who can take their vision to the next level.
Right.
It's very multifaceted. It's very complicated, and people in the industry glaze over the pod fade part. And I think when we really sit down and start to really address it, I think you're going to see a lot of people blossom, and that's one of the things I really
Yeah.
wanted to do with our community, especially in our space, because I've seen a lot of Black people start and then they just walk away. Oh,
Hmm.
nobody's listening, and they take it personal as if it's 100% them. No, actually, they don't take it personal. They take it as if the world is not ready for them,
Right.
instead of saying, well, what am I doing wrong here, and why is it not working, and how do I go about it?
Exactly. Exactly. And you did something in the group the other day. You had a live, and I mean, I won't say you put us on blast, but you were very pointed in a nice way. It was that you were actually very kind, because I believe it's not unkind to be clear. And you were like, look, I started this to uplift all of us, but y'all got to do the work, right? I get somebody always saying, Corey, we only see you, we only see you, we only see you. Well, yeah, because I'm the only one doing stuff. So if I bring people here, y'all got to show up. If I, am bringing courses, you got to show up. If I bring guests, you got to show up. I expect that's what a community is. A community is involved. A community is engaged, and it is difficult. I mean, part of the thing in running my business, I was just having this conversation with my coach. I'm like, there's a difference in working in your business and working on your business. And I know I get caught up sometimes working in the business, right? Because when tech doesn't go right, then you're spending all that day trying to get your tech right. And you're trying to, post the thing and do the stuff and do the, but that's not building anything necessarily, right? And
Mhm.
yet getting out there, getting engaged, taking all this dang content that I have and actually paying someone, because you're either paying in time or money, paying someone to clip it with the right size to just put all that stuff on TikTok, because I'm not going to do a new video on TikTok. I know me, I'm not doing that. I got too much other stuff going on, but it is a platform that's important. So why not repurpose stuff I've already done? So you got to be willing to, as you challenged us, right? Be engaged, learn, think about what you're doing. I've still listened to the SEO thing a couple of times, right? Because it's you're putting things out there for us to be able to do better. And so I think one of the things when I got to talk to you, one, you are so giving of your information, which is just so wonderful, right? And And I love that. And to your point a minute ago, we have to be ready to invest in what we say we want.
Yeah.
And we're not always willing to invest in getting to what we say we want. And so when I was telling you, you were talking to me about website, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to need you to look at my website. So I just need you to tell me what it's going to cost me to get an hour of your time, right? An hour or two of your time. Because I'm not trying to do that for free. Because you went to school and you trained and you earned the right to be able to do that, and you know how to do it. So why I wouldn't ask anybody else to do that for free. So when we're talking about this alignment of what we want to do and trying to eliminate this pod fade and really continuing to show up in the space, how do we also start talking to people about investing resources and doing what they say they want to do?
So what I've learned, with myself included, right? Because I'm still a one man operation. You said you
Me
said you
too.
like when you're like working in your business. I'm like
Yep.
that's why the fireside pay. That's why I haven't started on the fireside yet. And
Right.
then you had me thinking about like this week I started actually editing one of the courses, the first one we did, and I'm like, here
Yep.
it is 6 months later. I'm finally getting to it. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but to answer that question, so what I've learned, and I think by making like allowing myself to be open to talk to people and making
Yeah.
myself accessible not only to members when they came into this community, but even when I was on Facebook, I would like hit people up. I see you struggling, let's get on
Mm-hmm.
a call, let me see if I can help you. And
Right.
a lot of times my friends like, this is your business, you're supposed to be charging people, and I'm like, yeah, but let me help them, because
Yeah.
last thing I want to see somebody quit. But I think my mantra for this year was managing expectations, and by doing that, it's helped
Yes.
me with my business as well as just with the group and everything, myself included. Is
Mm-hmm.
like I tell people, like I'm glad, like for a while, for a couple of months I was like, damn, nobody's coming, like we didn't blow up like I expected us to. But then I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, and I sat down, thought about it, I said, no, but that's good, because it's
Right.
allowing me to make the mistakes I need, so that when we do
Mm-hmm.
scale, when we do have it, we can scale properly. We can make sure that we make the mistakes now when there's only 100. And this is no knock on
Right.
anybody in the group, but we have 100
Yeah.
people. I can make the mistakes now, but when we
Right.
have 1,000 people, it's a whole different ball game, and I need to be
Yes.
prepared for that. And it's like I'm preparing for that part. So, but when I talk to people about podcasting and just like making an investment, one of the things I'll tell them is like you can spend like for me sometimes, especially when I work with potential clients, if they tell me they can't take $100 and get a microphone, I'm not working with them,
Right.
because it's only it's only $100, and
Mm-hmm.
there's plenty of great mics. The first mics I started with, I got them. I got them for on sale at Guitar Center when I got started for
Right.
$50. I spent so much
Right.
money. I got those mics for $50. Guitar Center sent me a $200 rebate that I was able to go buy four more mics, and I got those for
Yes.
free. Right, so
Mm-hmm.
it
Mm-hmm.
was like there's an investment that you have to make. But I also realize that everybody's in different places, and in
Yes.
different financial resource places,
Mm-hmm.
different mental places, different social places. People have families and stuff. So, and
Yeah.
that's why in the group sometimes you'll hear me like talk a certain way, because I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
everybody's not where I'm at. Everybody doesn't see
Right.
how I see it. I'll take my last $20 and invest in my business before I go and do something outside of it.
Mm-hmm.
And it pisses my
Mm-hmm.
family off and friends off, but it's like, nah, man, this is what I'm doing. But
Right.
and people say they always respect it, but I think we have to understand people so when I talk to people, I'm like, okay, so what can you do to get started?
Yeah.
They see my setup, they see how, they see me with the headphones on them. Oh, I want what you
Yeah.
oh, you don't need this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes people like, start with a microphone and headphones, and I'm like, slow down for a second before you do that. But I also
Yeah.
say, if that's how you have to start, then that's how you need to start. But if you're going to
Yes.
start that, you need to have a plan where you're saying, I'm only going to use this poor setup for 2 months, and
Mm-hmm.
create a plan where I'm putting $25 a week into a
Right.
savings account somewhere, so I can go buy me $100 mic, so I can go,
Right.
um, because I'm gonna keep it real with you. When I was young and I wanted to have my own studio, and Daryl, if he's still here, he knows this because he's an
Yeah.
engineer as
Daryl's
well.
there.
Um, he knows this too. Back 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, if you wanted to have a studio, you need at least 20 grand, like to have decent
Right.
equipment in your studio. Now,
Right.
for especially in the podcasting space, with $1,000, you could have a great setup, and that's
Right.
you can get a Rodecaster Pro, the mic like I have for 250. But that's
Mm-hmm.
but at $1,000, you have a setup that you're ready to roll out with, and you can really get studio or professional level sound out of it. So
Mhm.
I'm like, well, let's create a plan where you can get to that goal, but you got to do the work to get to that goal. I can sit here all day long and tell you, yo, just take $20 aside and get a decent mic.
Yeah.
You can get a decent mic that you can hook up to your phone just so you get better audio. You
Yes.
know, there's ways of
Yes.
this. We have so much more, and because of podcasting, blew up the past couple of years. You have all these different companies just throwing stuff out there. They're testing out and seeing
Yes.
what the market's going to want. So, you know, like Zoom to compete with Rode, they threw out a way cheaper level series of
Mhm.
recorders out there to see who, you know, to make it accessible to everybody.
Right.
You know, so
Right.
of all budgets. So you just got to come, if you're serious about it, you got to come up with a plan to get this going and to get out there and figure out how you want to make this work. And it's hard for a lot of people to look at it that way. You know,
Yeah.
they look at what other
I
people are
love
doing, or
that.
somebody comes in with some bad advice and says, hey, you could just do this. And it's like,
Yep.
okay, you did that. And then you're like, what's next? And that was one of the
I
main
love
reasons why I
that.
wanted to start the community, was so that you have a place where you can come to, of people
Mhm.
of all levels, of all skill sets, and who've had all kinds of levels of experience, who can help you better map out
Yeah.
that path if that's where you want to get started, or you're trying to
See,
improve.
that is fantastic. And I see, welcome Stacy, and I see Deanna there. And this is why, y'all, I don't talk to everybody on my show, and that's not about being um, being snobby or any of that kind of stuff. But I always, there's always a connection for me. And there's a reason it's called Alignment Vision Action. Everything I do, the Rutledge Perspective Radio Show, the Rutledge Perspective Podcast, this Alignment Vision Action, everything I work with my clients on is about alignment, vision, and action. And you heard Corey say, you've really got to have a plan and you got to manage expectations. And Deanna will tell you, I always tell people you got to manage expectations, yours and others. It's not unkind to be clear. Be really clear about what it is you want and what you're willing to do to make it happen. And don't be mad at yourself if it's just not that time. Sometimes it's just not that time. Sometimes you are in a family situation, or you're in, it's just a time in your life, or a time in your business, or whatever. It's your podcast is your side hustle, and there's something crazy going on at work. So you need to set it aside a minute, or you're going to have to go for 6 months, and all you're going to be able to do is sleep 2 hours a night or something. Just set clear expectations for yourself and understand what that means for you going forward, and be really honest, right? And run your race. Don't run somebody else's. Run your race.
That is very important. People look at like Joe Rogan or some other people that have been,
Mm-hmm.
and I use Joe Rogan as an example for people to understand something. Joe Rogan's success in this space has nothing to do with his podcast. It has to do with his
Mm-mm.
brand and him as a brand.
Yep.
And I tell
Yes.
people, like, I learned about Joe Rogan in the late '90s when he was on news radio, because I used to come home from work late at night and the reruns would be on, and I would watch
Mm-hmm.
it while I was eating dinner, right? And that's how I became a fan of his. I was like, oh, I liked him. I like this character. That was like
Mm-hmm.
1998, 1999.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And then
Yes.
after, when that show ended, and it was a popular NBC show at the time too.
Mm-hmm.
So when that show ended, then he got Fear Factor, which was also
Right.
another big show that people loved, right? And then
Mm-hmm.
after Fear Factor, and he found his real niche was his real audience, which was the UFC, and that just
Right.
exploded him, and that's where his loyal fan base came from. You
Mm-hmm.
know, that's how he built the empire he built in this podcasting space, because he's been
Right.
doing it with his friends or something. Again, white males
Yeah.
doing, do that were up on this, and that's how he built this empire that he has
Mm-hmm.
now. And people see that and they think that, oh, Joe Rogan just blew up because of that, not realizing this was 20, 30 years in the making.
Yes.
And
Yes.
he just got into something at the, at the, was not momentum level, but
Right.
that that startup stage. And he
Yes.
just happened to be in that stage, and as the UFC brand grew, he grew, and
Yes.
his anything else he was touching at the time was growing along with it. So
Yep.
managing expectations, I like Gilly and Wallow. Right now they're like one of the hottest black podcasts out there,
Mm-hmm.
and with $1 million worth of game, and and people want to mimic it, and they look at it and they think that's like, I'm like, but these guys have been doing this for a long time. They
A
already
long
have
time.
an established audience. So you
Yes.
gotta slow down, and you gotta really work on who, like you said, when you started your podcast, it was a lead generation for you for your coaching business.
Yeah.
So you knew who you were targeting already.
Yes.
And
Yep.
a lot of our people don't understand that part. They don't understand. I see that just in business.
Yeah.
In business in general, especially with the pandemic money business that started, where people just, like my neighborhood, we have nothing but event spaces, and everybody was
Yeah.
doing event spaces because it was dirt cheap during the pandemic because
Right.
these landlords just needed whatever money they could come in.
Right.
um then it was before the pandemic, it was like all the weave shops, and it was like, but it was like
Yep.
literally blocks away from each other, and I'm like, well, there's so much competition here, like how do you
Mhm.
succeed? And of course
Mhm.
now a lot of those places are closed because there was just
Right.
too much competition. And it's like, well,
Right.
you didn't really know your market, you just saw other people doing it, and people were like, oh, I made $1,200 this week off of that, and they like, but my question to people is always, I don't care how much money you made, I want to know how much you netted.
Right. Right.
I want to know what you
Exactly.
netted. I don't care about what
Yeah.
you made. And I
Yeah.
always tell my friends, be careful of that I made. And then even in this
Yes.
podcasting space, be careful of I made $200,000. Okay, but how much did you leave with?
How
How much
much
at the
did
end
you
of the year
leave?
did you have in your pocket?
Right. Right.
Because if you only had ten
And
thousand dollars, I'm not gonna say I don't want $10,000, but you know,
yeah. Yeah.
y-
Well, and I think to your point too, we've got to be careful. There's a book because I talked about Malcolm Gladwell earlier. The first book of his that I read called Outliers, and
outliers,
it gets
yes.
to your point, right? Of sometimes we see all these things where people just blew up quickly, right? All these we're in the world of influencers, right? That's the generation that we're in now, and there are some people who hit YouTube really early or who hit Instagram really early, who hit the window of no competition, right? What they were doing is so unique, or they already had an audience because they were a Kardashian. Heaven help us. There are people like that hit it just right, and so that you saw some really crazy growth. I will tell you guys, to Corey's point, number one, before you go thinking somebody did this overnight, go do a little bit more research, right? Go really look at how long they've been doing it. But number two, what are you really trying to do? What is your real goal? Is your goal to have 3.5 million followers or, subscribers on your YouTube channel? Or is your goal to make an impact and to have a loyal fan base? Because if you read Seth Godin's book, This is Marketing, he talks about the Grateful Dead. And the Grateful Dead started in like backwater, little bitty clubs, but their fan base, wherever they went, they didn't care where they were playing. They were going to be there. And that's how the Grateful Dead started. They didn't start with a million fans in big stages. They started by building very, very small, loyal ambassadors. And so you got to decide what you want. That's what vision is all about. What is it that you want? And be willing to revisit that on a regular basis and flex a little bit with the
Right.
how. Don't worry about the how initially. The how is none of your business. It's the what you need to get really clear on. The how will take care of itself because the how is going to morph depending on what's going on. Right. So, folks in the audience, anybody who has any questions or comments would love to click your little button and come on up to the stage. We'd love to have your questions or comments as we get close to 45 minutes. It was just such a great conversation. I didn't give you guys a lot of chance to talk. So we're going to have Corey back on. But Corey, as you've been in this business a long time, and as you said, you were in the music business for a while. You did tour support for Def Jam. I mean, you've been in this arena for a long time. If you had two or three things that you would say to people, like if they're wanting to do a fireside show or they're wanting to start podcasts or anything that's more kind of media related, what are two or three things that you would say to people that they really need to think through before they decide to do this?
All right. So I have my thing called the podcast startup. I was sitting down and I was like looking at what I'm doing and just everybody's
Mm-hmm.
doing in the podcast space. And as I started like doing some more research and as I try to always figure out how to get my message across. And
Right.
I was just like, there's too much similarities to building an app and building your brand or building a media, right? So I have my system, which is basically you need to understand. One, I would tell them what I typically ask people: what are your goals? What is the purpose?
Mm-hmm.
What are you trying to achieve by this, right? And it sounds like everybody else when they say this, but even myself included. When I was doing the group and on Facebook and I wanted to quit, and it was like my friend, she was like, "Well, Corey, you got to make a decision. You keep telling me every couple of weeks you want to quit this because it was a lot. It
Yeah.
was overwhelming. It was like I'm
Mm-hmm.
trying to do this and people are not getting it, and why they're not getting it, and sometimes me just being too smart,
Yeah.
right? Now like 50 Cent says, when he got started, he had to dumb down his music and he took
Mm-hmm.
off. And I hate to
Mm-hmm.
say it that way, but it was like but I'm a mad scientist, so I always overcomplicate things. So
Me
when
too.
I had to slow that down, but it was like, why are people not listening? Why are people not
Hmm.
understanding what I'm saying? And once I realized, once I decided I wanted to create a standard, and that gave me the
Hmm.
purpose, that gave me the goal that I had to achieve. So everything I do is to get to that point. So one I would say is, what is your goal for doing this,
Yeah.
especially when you're doing media stuff? Because the building of an audience is a slow grind. It's a painful
Yes.
grind. It's a it's a marathon, right?
Hmm.
So it's going to take you time. This is a long game, not a short game. Now you might
Right.
blow up one day and have a, and that's why I call it like a startup, because one day you could
Yeah.
have 0 users and the next day you have 1 million users, right? And it could,
Yep.
same thing could happen with your content. You could go to sleep, wake up in the morning, for some reason your video went viral, which is why everybody's doing ridiculous and saying ridiculous things to go viral,
Exactly.
right?
Yes.
But it would be set a goal. No, I think really the first thing is, what is your purpose? What is the message
Yeah.
you want to get across? And I
Hmm.
tell people, even with entertainment and gossip podcasts, there's a message there. There's a purpose there.
Yes.
Even if it's just for entertainment, that's the purpose. And if you
Hmm.
understand that's what your purpose is, then your content will be shaped around that. Then
Right.
the next part is, once you understand your message, because once you have your message, then you can express it to people. So when you do
Yeah.
your 11 your elevator pitch to somebody, and I say, what's your podcast about? And people go on a tangent, I'm like, okay, now we gotta start from square one. So
Short.
set goals, understand your purpose slash message, and then what is the outcomes you want your audience to have? And I think that's the
Hmm.
part. It took me a long time to understand. And I think Rob Dunwood in the group for this, because me and him used to talk all the time. And I
Hmm.
think I didn't realize. I remember one time you said, and I use this all the time when I talk to people. You have to train your audience, right? You have to train them to
Hmm.
what you want to do. So, what are the outcomes? What is the call to actions? A lot of podcasters want to monetize their podcast and feel they have to reach some kind of made up milestone. And this is a
Hmm.
problem. This is another thing I was seeing in
Hmm.
in the culture
Yes.
differences from other groups was, well, you should start at 10,000 listeners, and I'm like, well, the average podcast listen doesn't even make through 100 listens a month, so you're giving out bad
Right.
advice.
Yes.
So, and I'm sitting here
Yes.
thinking to myself, so why can't I capitalize off those 100 people that are listening to my podcast? Why do I
Yes.
have to wait till 1,000, 10,000 people? Why can't those 100 people start giving me 100 people giving me $5 a month? It's how much money?
Right.
How much is
Right.
that a year?
Right. Exactly.
$500 a month
Exactly.
is 6 grand a year.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when you start breaking it down to that level to people, they start to really understand. So I would say, know your message, know your goals, know your message, and know the outcomes you want your listeners to have. And in doing that, everything you put out, you can use. I test it. Like, even when I do stuff
Hmm.
for the group and I'm working on our content, and I'm really starting to understand. I'm really starting to understand a little bit better, because I don't. Even though I may sound like I know what the hell I'm talking about, sometimes I don't. Um, I just learn well from other people,
Right.
but
Me too. Yeah.
I'm learning, like, if it doesn't meet that test. So, like, if I have a goal and it's, and the content or what I'm thinking about doing doesn't meet that test, it doesn't pass that
Hmm.
test. When I say, okay, what's our message for the Black
Hmm.
Podcast Association? That's why I work very diligently to select and work hard towards bringing people into the group for certain particular workshops. And
Yeah.
and I'm really like, okay, yeah, you can go over here and get that off of YouTube, but what can we do inside the group that will really give
Hmm.
you impact? And if it's not going to do that, I don't get rid of it. I put it to the side, because just
Yeah.
right now we're not in that space. But maybe in a year from now, 6 months from now, a week from now,
Yeah.
we might be in that space where I'm like, okay, now this person's thing fit. And it
Yeah.
typically me getting the beat of the group. So if I start seeing a number of people asking certain questions, I'm like, okay, now I can bring this person in. Right
Yes.
now, I can bring this in because everybody's receptive to it. But I
Hmm.
wouldn't know that if I didn't know my message, if I didn't know what I want the outcomes for the community to be.
Yeah.
One of my personal outcomes is, I want everybody in our community to, a year from when they came into the group, to be in a completely different space with their podcast a year
Hmm.
from now.
Hmm. Hmm.
Not I'm not gonna sit here and say I can get you there in 30 days or 60
Right.
days or 90 days, like most people do when they're trying to
Sell something.
sell
Yeah.
something. But a year
Yeah.
from now, I think, is a realistic a time for you even if it's just one little step, you're
Yes.
not in the same place you was a year ago. And that's and
Right.
that's and that's the long game, because building audiences
Yeah.
take time.
It's, and that, if you guys hear nothing else, please hear that. And whether or not you're doing a podcast or anything media, even if you are building your brand, because in your career, because you are your brand in your career too, how you show up to work every day, all that kind of stuff. It takes time. And I will tell you, when I first started this podcast, I'm like, yeah, same thing Corey was saying. Nobody's listening. Oh my gosh, I'm never going to get downloads. And this whole idea of, well, if you're going to get advertising, you have to have so many downloads a week. And there's still a lot of platforms built that way. You know, if you don't have 10,000 downloads a week, then we're not going to advertise with you because advertisers want more. Well, the reality is advertisers want to get at black dollars, and black people are listening to black podcasters. And so, you know, and the same with Latino, right? There are some things that people are looking for. And so I remember being told, well, yeah, once you hit 5,000 downloads, it's just going to take off. Well, that's not necessarily true either, right? And so it is really, it's again going into year three. And I say year three, it's probably year two and a half, because the first 6 months or so I was consistent for about 3 months, and then I went off. You know, so you got to be real
Yeah.
with yourself, right?
Yeah.
And so it is just now really getting to the point where I probably have consistently over 100 downloads a week. Just now, right?
That's
two
good.
years in. But I have been recording every week. I'm on the radio show every week. I talk about it all the time. I'm posting about it. But it took time to do that, and my own kind of look, you got to be willing to promote yourself too. People aren't going to just find it by accident
Right.
necessarily. If
Right.
you really want people to know, you have to be willing not only to record it and put it out there, but then talk about it.
Yep. This is not Field of Dreams.
It's
This is
not,
not Field of
it's not.
Dreams. And that's another thing I always used to address in the group. This is not, if you build it, you know, your friends and your family, first of all, you shouldn't even be looking to them, but your friends and your family, they'll give you all kind of encouragement, but
Oh,
don't,
yeah.
they're going to say and tell you, yeah, just put it out there. But no, there has to be a marketing plan. There has to be some
Yeah.
investment. And, you know, you brought up something about the advertisers real quick. I think for us as black people in our community, we need to also understand you are surrounded
Yes.
by sponsors.
Surrounded.
You're
Yes.
surrounded. And the Black Listeners Report made me realize that when we did a talk on that. So you can check it out on our YouTube page. But we
Yeah.
did a whole panel on that last year when it came out. And you know, I still go back and read it periodically. But one of the
Mm-hmm.
biggest things is listeners were saying that they were more apt to purchase a product made by a black person that they hear on a black podcast.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was
Mm-hmm.
like 65% of some crazy number.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
I'm not a marketing whiz, but I know you know, like the what is it, the return on investment for marketing
Yeah.
dollars to it's a real low percentage.
It is. Yeah.
That's why you're constantly being bombarded by these companies. That's why these companies spend millions and hundreds of million dollars on
Yes.
ad campaigns just for them. You know, McDonald's, their ad campaign, their budget is probably ridiculous just so
Yes.
they can get a couple people to, you know, keep people coming into their store. And it's like 10,
Yes.
20% of the people that see it want to go to this, you know, respond to
Mm-hmm.
that. But it was like
Mm-hmm.
65%. And I'm sitting here like, you're sitting here telling me you want to monetize your podcast
Yeah.
when all you got to do is just walk down your block, the strip, you know, the strip where all the stores are at by your, you know,
Yeah.
I'm in New York City. So like I can walk
Yeah.
down the block and there's a whole strip of stores.
Right.
I know everybody's not like that. I got to remind myself that,
Right.
you know, I don't like, if you live in Brooklyn, you could just canvass your neighborhood and
Yeah.
I'm willing to bet you can at least get $100 from at least 5 or 6 businesses
Mm-hmm.
that will be willing to give you $100 to sponsor one of your episodes, not your whole
Right.
entire podcast, one of your
Right.
episodes. And I say
Yep.
that because you got to start somewhere. Start with
Yes.
getting one episode sponsored, you
Mm-hmm.
know,
Mm-hmm.
and then work with there. Because if you can bring, if they 10 people heard my podcast and they come to the store and they utilize the discount you or whatever you offer,
Yes.
that person's going to look at it like, well, hold up, I'm on some. And we as podcasters are responsible for helping these businesses to understand
Yes.
that what this medium, why they should be on this medium.
Right.
My
Right.
goal with my business is to get businesses to understand why you should have every business should have a podcast. Some
Yeah.
people disagree with me, but if you're especially if you're in the service industry where you
Mm-hmm.
provide a
Mm-hmm.
service, you should have a podcast.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know,
You
so
should. Yeah.
I think that's
You're
important.
creating your industry, right?
And and managing expectations, like you got to start somewhere. Like you
Yeah.
don't have to, you know, I always have sports analogies because I played a ton of sports. Coach
Yeah.
used to always be like, and in baseball it was a big thing. You don't swing, you don't win the game by hitting home runs. You win the game by getting on base. And if
Yes.
everybody's getting
Yes.
on base, you know,
Yeah.
if you ever played baseball, if you ever went to a baseball game where they have a rally, what is a rally? Everybody puts on their rally cap. You turn your hat backwards. What happens? That means everybody's keeps getting on base and they're driving in
Yes.
runs, and they don't want it
Yes.
to stop. And that's how you win at that. And
Mm-hmm.
we have to, you know, black people are very we like to get things. We're very what's the word? We like to get
Instant
things right
gratification.
now. Yeah, instant
Yes.
gratification,
Yep.
and
Yep.
we don't realize sometimes we just got to slow down,
Yeah.
and just
I
figure and take it step by step. And that's one of the things I started in the Facebook group, and I'm really trying to bring it over here. And I think a lot of the members in the group right now understand that process now.
yeah. I think I'm gonna have to find a sociologist and have a conversation around uh, the psychosocial challenge in the Black and Latino communities of coming late to the party, instant gratification, access, all that kind of stuff. I think that'd probably be like a conversation that would last like 4 years. But I think that's a conversation we need
I got somebody
we
if you
need to
want.
have.
He could probably explain it. He's a real smart brother. We talk about and this these are things we were going to talk about on our podcast. And now I'm thinking
Yes,
about it. Maybe I might have to sit down with him now that like, we got the equipment and everything. I already made the
yes,
investment. We may have to respark that idea, but that was something we wanted because one thing I
yes,
learned in programming is you know, programming is a step by step, and
yes.
that's one. I always say that's one of the best things, but decisions I ever made was to go back to school and learn how to program. I was doing it
Mhm,
personal, but I
mhm,
officially learned how to do it right by going back to
mhm,
school.
mhm.
But you got to think things step by step.
Yeah,
And yes, you want the instant gratification. You want this idea to work, but you also understand I got to reverse engineer. I got to figure out. I've been
yeah.
working on this one issue on this app that I'm working on for like 3 weeks, just trying to figure
Mhm.
out some of these bugs. Today, I think I figured it out before I got on here.
Yeah.
So like, when I get up here, I'm gonna get on it. But
Yeah.
long story short, you got to work step by step, and a lot of it is the survival, right? It's the instant
Yes.
gratification is because we lack resources. We don't, so when you
Yes.
do get it, you get, you splurge, or
Right.
some of it is the low self esteem because you come from a poor background or you come from a certain
Mhm.
socioeconomic background. So it's real complicated, and I'm
Yeah.
always about having those real deep conversations. So, but I would love to see
Yeah.
something like that because. But I also realize a lot of
Absolutely.
people will get their feelings hurt when they hear those conversations too, because they're not going to understand. They're going to
Alignment,
feel
vision,
attacked.
action. I'm telling you, I say it all the time. It is, look, we are anything where you see me, we are going to speak the truth, right? We're going to have compassion and we're not going to be nasty to people, but it is not unkind to be clear. And we just got to call it like it is. And the
Yeah,
reality is, there are many times when we get in our own way. Some of those things are systemic. There is such a thing as the truth. There is such a thing as facts, and there really does exist systemic challenges for
right.
access for us. And so
Oh
we've
yeah,
got to
definitely.
address those things. We've got to address those things, and know them, because I think my podcast 2 weeks ago was talking about victimization doesn't make you a victim. It just doesn't. It gives you greater clarity around what you're doing and what you're dealing with. So let's just talk about it. Let's talk about it. Bring it to the light. That
Right.
way, when you can deal with it. So, well, y'all, I am. It is right at just about 8 o'clock, and um, if please feel free to jump in again if you have any questions. Thank you so much, Deanna. If you have any questions or comments, any chats, just send those over. Corey, I just thank you so much for being on
Oh,
on
thank you.
Alignment Vision Action. It was awesome, and I'm excited for you to start your show on Fireside too. I'll come and do that,
I'm working
for
on it.
sure. Yeah, so just add that to the list, my friend. But y'all, I really appreciate it. I appreciate your being here this evening. I know you have a choice, so thank you so much for choosing to be here on Alignment Vision Action with me. Catch me tomorrow. The radio show this week, actually, you're doing it on Friday, so I'll probably catch some different people. You can catch that on my Facebook page or my LinkedIn channel. It's also going to be on YouTube live. But you can find all things me on laurelrutledge.com. So just go there and you can find all things about me. But the radio show will be live tomorrow. The podcast dropped on Wednesday, so we're talking about not being fearless. That fearless isn't a thing. So we'll talk about that and dig into that a little bit deeper. But thank you so much for tuning into Alignment Vision Action. I will be back again next week. Have a ton of guests coming up in August and September. And I've got a special one that I'm working on. I'm sending her another note in August. So I am believing that she's going to be on the show. So please, please, please continue to tune in. Go check out some of these other creators. They are fantastic. There's some amazing shows that are out there. And I really, if we can just go and support each other, I think we can continue to build amazing, amazing communities. And if you are a Black podcaster, Go to Mighty Networks and check out the Black Podcasters Association and join our community that Corey has so amazingly put together, where we are trying to lift up each other and learn and grow together. So, Corey, thank you again. I really appreciate it. I know you're an hour ahead of me, so I'm going to let you go since you figured out your podcast issue or your app issue so you can go get that fixed. And then I will plan